you've ever tried learning a language, regardless of which one, chances are at some point you've come across the concept of flashcards. This very simple idea that you stick a word or a sentence on one side of a card and there's something that you have to learn from it, to test yourself on, and then on the other side there's an answer. When you think about it, I'd say a majority of the online learning materials available at the moment are iterations of digital flashcards. In recent years, I feel like there's started to be more doubts casted on the value of these. Like, are they really as effective as people have made them out to be in the past? And yeah, in this video I want to defend them and say that really what we need to focus on is not the process of using flashcards, but the content you put in them and then how you use them. In simple terms, is basically the same idea that data scientists talk about. That this idea of if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. But on the flip side, if you put in something that, although simple, is really, really valuable, and then you build up hundreds of these cards, then the amount of value you get from that is huge. It's just entirely on how you set them up and how you use them. I'm such a strong proponent of them. Basically, I've been using flashcards quite strictly for nearly a decade now. I think I started about 7 or 8 years ago when I was learning Chinese at a university in Beijing. What it's shown to me is just how effective a flashcard study system can be if you really, really commit to it. It's easy as well, and you don't actually end up using as much time as you might expect you would need to learn a new skill. When you try and develop a new skill, often the issue is that you're trying to learn something quite complicated, something quite skillful, and find a method that allows you to pick apart these very, very complicated ideas and make them make sense in your head. But with languages you have a slightly different issue, at least this is how I see it. The components of a language on their own are very, very simple. It's just you have thousands of them, and then you have to piece them all together. So in that circumstance, having some kind of system that allows you to take thousands of tiny but simple ideas and then process them and then make connections between all of them very, very quickly, that's really what you're looking for. The basic component of a language is basically just an idea. And then a language is a way of stringing these ideas together in a way that allows us to communicate. So it's worth thinking for a second about what makes an idea a good idea. Good ideas are often simple. I mean, just think for a second about the wheel. The wheel is an extremely simple idea, but it has allowed humanity to develop in quite amazing ways. Flashcards are a very, very simple, powerful idea. They are certainly perfectly situated for learning something like a language. Anything that involves taking many, many tiny ideas and stitching them all together, this is really where flashcards come into their own. This means that you can absorb each idea very, very quickly. The problem is that there are so many ideas that it becomes overwhelming. If they are set up right, it's very difficult to become overwhelmed. They allow you to organize huge amounts of information, but also decide when that information appears. As long as the cards are set up in an intelligent manner, you're almost guaranteed to get useful input and make amazing connections between everything that you learn with relatively little effort. In order to actually take anything in, your language input has to be something that you can understand. So that means that you can't take in things which are really, really way more difficult than you can understand. But on the flip side, if you try and put in information that is already too easy for you, you don't really progress very much. And it's very easy to fall into a trap. Oh, brilliant, I'm understanding everything here, so I'm getting better. But really, there should be a sweet spot. Everything is challenging, but it's still doable. So you could think of this as either underloading a card or overloading a card. So like if I just quickly swap over to Anki here, if I can do that. Let's see if this works. This first time I'm trying this piece of software to get it to work. Unfortunately, I've already done my flashcards for the day, so showing you exactly what I'd want is not ideal. But I think if I come into here and then go over to these cards, which I'm not using at the moment, so these are some Welsh cards I was using a few months ago. And then if you look over here on the right side, you'll see the information that goes into my flashcards. This is an extremely simple card. So it just says, I'm fine, dwi'n iawn. But if we go to one of the later cards, things become a little bit more complex. So this card just says, this time Hugh Lewis is right. But if you look, this card here is actually built on the previous information. This word here, iawn, which in this context means fine. Over here it suddenly means right, but it's still the same word and it's still a relatively simple sentence. So here there's like a build-up, but one that's also not too slow. So in this particular deck I only have 120 cards, but within that there is a very large amount of vocabulary covered. I think there were about 500 base words in that deck. So is that going to come back? Yes, we're back on. I thought I'd lost the screen there. So when you're making flashcards, you need to try and balance getting new input in, but it also being manageable. As an anecdotal example here, my dad is learning Welsh. That's one of the reasons why I have Welsh resources at the moment. I was trying to help him out. I won't say what materials he's using because I'm terrified of libel, but a very popular language method is what my dad is using. I can't help but notice that despite the fact that he studies every day, which is a great thing, he's also stuck on very much the same simple stuff over and over and over again. I heard him doing his practice, and all I could hear was dwi'n mynd I dafer, like I'm going to the pub, over and over and over again. So here, the sentence itself is great for a flashcard, but there's no building on top of that. It's just going round in circles. If you want flashcards to be really effective, they have to be understandable, but also progressive, building on what you learned before. There are many little things you can tweak with flashcards to make them more effective, but I think the core components that differentiate great flashcard usage and using them in a bit of a weaker way is the value and the utility you get from each card, and then how all of those cards connect. And to make that work really well, personally, I think you have to have some individual influence on those cards. I personally feel you have to at least make a large number of them yourself. You get to develop the kind of words that you would use. Plus also get to think about, what do you actually want to say? What is really important for you to say? And then, of course, it's important to remember that to have a proper conversation, you have to talk with other people. So a mix of what do you as an individual want to say, but also what is most likely going to be immediately valuable for you to understand other people. We all have different interests. We all need to talk about different things. There is a kind of base level that everyone talks about, this everyday life thing. For the things that you as an individual actually want to talk about, there is a lot of individual bias. We all have different hobbies. We all have different surroundings. And because of that, just having a kind of base information that can be applied on anybody, it doesn't really work. And, if I think back to my school days of studying German, there are whole modules that were not useless per se, but really I didn't get a lot of value out of, because they had to cater to, well, it was a curriculum, it had to cater to a whole country. Whereas if you shrink things down to a geographical level, already there are going to be different things that people talk about, want to talk about, or are even interested in the first place. And then on a wider scale, people will have different understandings of different word usage. So for example, if I think of a tree, coming from the UK, and spending a lot of my childhood in the south, I would probably picture an oak tree. But if I were to ask one of my old students in Japan to imagine a tree, they might think of a cherry tree. Or, this was in a city called Matsuyama, and Matsuyama means pine mountain. That's a very crude translation. So maybe they would think of a pine tree. That building the base of your language knowledge, it's really, really valuable to think about what you need, because circumstances are different. And that could really, really influence how you want to talk and how you will need to communicate. What I've been trying to say is that when you start out in a language, you want to be able to communicate quickly, and you want to have a kind of vocabulary that you actually want to use. When you start out on a language, you should aim to get it functioning in your head first. Make lots of connections, learn really, really useful, valuable stuff, and then build from there in a very generalist way. That is why flashcards can be absolutely brilliant, because you can focus on what is immediately useful and build up a large vocabulary in a very short amount of time and make connections between them. But it's also maybe why they can appear sometimes to not be that effective. If you have set them up in a way that brings you away from what is useful to you, if you have a flashcard deck that's filled with different animals, unless you're a zoologist, it's not going to be immediately useful for you to learn the word for tortoise and the word for killer ant. I don't know. Think about when you're learning, about in terms of both how effective your learning is, but also how efficient your learning is. There is a focus in the moment on efficiency. This is something which has been very important to me in the past as well. But efficiency means absolutely nothing if it's not also effective. Because if you learn 1,000 words really quickly, but they're not words that you're going to use, your learning was very, very efficient. But how effective was it? Using flashcards well, then, is to use them cleverly and to use them in a way that is valuable to you. And if you do that, they're suddenly the most amazing learning tool. And if you just let someone choose all this information for you in a way that doesn't help you progress, then they're efficient, but they're certainly not effective. Focus on what is useful for you, focus on what you want to talk about. And in a future video, I might talk about ways how you can do that. Avoid falling into that trap of being very, very efficient without any effectiveness whatsoever.